You're listening to Watchman Internet Radio. It's Friday, January 4th. Let's crank it up. This is my first program of the new year. We're going to talk about the daily text. I have a question from someone who's studying with Jehovah's Witnesses. We'll consider his questions. Talk a little bit about what's going on in the world. And play a little more music. It is amazing what you can do with 3 chords and a bunch of amperage. Well, okay, let's consider the daily text for Friday, January the 4th, 2019. It's hard to get used to saying that, 2019. I must also declare the good news of the kingdom of God to other cities, because for this I was sent. Luke 4:43. Of all the people who have lived, who is the most outstanding example of a spiritual person? It is Jesus, of course. Throughout his life and ministry, he showed that he wanted to imitate his Father, Jehovah. He thought, felt, and acted like Jehovah and lived in harmony with God's will and standards. Note, for example, how Jehovah's feelings of compassion are described by the prophet Isaiah, and compare that description with what the gospel writer Mark reports about Jesus' feelings. Are we, like Jesus, ever ready to show compassionate concern when we meet people who need help? In addition, Jesus devoted himself to the work of preaching and teaching the good news. All such feelings and actions are marks of a spiritual person. Well, there's a lot we could talk about in this daily text. I think it is good from time to time to reflect upon what a blessing it is to know the truth. You know, Jesus was, as the text mentioned, he was the foremost preacher of the good news. That was his mission, to preach the kingdom of God. And he did it intensely for the 3.5 years from the time of his baptism until the time of his death. And he knew his ministry was going to be of short duration, but he made sure that it carried on. And so he trained other men to carry on the work. And after his ascension to heaven, the outpouring of the Spirit, it impelled men and women to continue in the preaching work, spread the good news far and wide throughout the Mediterranean world. But more importantly, the Spirit inspired men, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Paul, James, Jude, primarily, to record many of the events associated with the life of Jesus and the works of his apostles. And that record has been preserved for us. Although we can't say that everyone has had access to those writings. For hundreds of years, the Catholic Church and Orthodoxy and the Church of England, for that matter, they suppressed the Bible. They prevented people from translating it into the common languages. They wanted to keep the Bible locked up in dead languages so people couldn't read it. But Jehovah broke through that block, didn't he? I think the invention of the printing press, at least in the Western world, China had a printing press before Gutenberg. But at any rate, the first book published was the Bible. And whereas the priests used to burn any Bible that they found written in the common languages, and it took years to really write out a Bible by hand, the printing press won the victory. And eventually the Church of England, the Catholic Church, they relented and they allowed people to have a Bible. Can you imagine? And now they still pretend to be the keepers of the truth. Well, that all changed, didn't it, with Charles Taze Russell and his group of Bible students, because they made it their mission to publish the truth. The good news of the kingdom began to be preached again. Whereas there were some groups throughout history, even with the Bible locked in a dead language, there were itinerant preachers who realized some of the basic teachings of the Bible and how far off the churches had strayed. But they were, like the Lollards and the Waldenses, they were snuffed out and eventually they were persecuted originally, but then reabsorbed back into Christendom, you might say. But not so with the Bible students and Jehovah's Witnesses. And anyone who doesn't appreciate the work that the Watchtower does, they may be ignorant of it, but you may have some built-up resistance and prejudice to the fact that the Watchtower has spearheaded a remarkable preaching campaign. JW.org now has basic Bible information in over 700 languages. It's unbelievable. They've published the Bible in over 100 languages. And so the truth is available if a person wishes to know it. The sad fact is most people don't want to know the truth. They didn't in Jesus' day either, did they? There were Jews that actually saw Jesus perform miracles, and they weren't moved at all. One of Jesus' most astounding miracles was when he resurrected his friend Lazarus. And some of the Jews that witnessed this miracle became believers, but the account says others went off and told the Pharisees. And the Pharisees determined to kill not only Jesus, but Lazarus as well. People are no different today. And the reason is, Jesus said, "The light has come into the world, but men have loved the darkness because their own works are wicked, and they will not come to the light in order that their works may not be reproved." So people today are of that same sinful nature. They may call themselves Christians, but they refuse to really accept the good news. They prefer to believe nonsensical lies, hellfire, the Trinity. And even in our very text today, Jesus said, "For this reason I was sent forth." Who sent Jesus forth? Does God send himself forth? Does God order himself and obey himself? Paul, the Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Hebrews, referred to Jesus as an apostle. The word apostle means sent forth. Jesus sent forth the 12, but Jesus himself was sent forth. And furthermore, Jesus said, "A slave is not greater than his master, and neither is the one who is sent forth greater than the one who sent him forth." And Jesus said, "He was sent forth. He said that on numerous occasions. So there you have it, a very simple yet profound truth that the majority of those who call themselves Christians refuse to accept. And that precious truth is Jehovah sent forth his Son. If you believe that, you know a lot more than the billion people or so who call themselves Christians, because they refuse to accept that basic, elemental, scriptural truth. We can appreciate that this truth has been made available. The times we're living in are monumental. What are the words of that Charles Dickens novel? These were the best of times and the worst of times. So we're living in a period where the preaching of this good news is taking place. Jesus said, and the good news of the kingdom will be preached in all the world, and then the end will come. Well, Jehovah's Witnesses know the truth. However, they're in the dark concerning prophecy. And that is because the Watchtower has applied virtually all prophecy to 1914. And Jehovah's Witnesses are under the impression that the end that Jesus was speaking of is the end of the world. And that is not the case. As I've written about and talked about, the end is the end of the preaching work, the end of the disciple-making work, the end, for all intent and purpose, the end of the Christian era. And then a new phase begins, the time of the end, the harvest. I won't go into all that now. Let's play another song. Okay. That song doesn't want to quit, does it? Well, as I had mentioned, this is the first program of the new year. I had actually done one the other day, but I accidentally deleted it. I use an Apple, and for videos I use Final Cut Pro, but I record the audio in Logic. Final Cut Pro saves everything automatically. Logic doesn't, and that's what messed me up. I didn't save my program. I hit the wrong button. Everything disappeared, and I didn't have the heart to redo it. Anyway, I'm learning from my mistakes, as hopefully we all do. But this year, boy, shaping up to be a tumultuous year. Wild stock market gyrations. The bond market is showing signs of collapse. And Donald Trump, of course, is always the center of news. The U.S. Congress just convened yesterday, and a newly elected representative, first day in office, claims that we are going to impeach this mother. I'm not joking. So that's sort of, I guess, that's the agenda for the coming year. They can't have a president who goes around undoing the British Empire's perpetual war agenda. And that's what the United States has been involved in since 9/11. The United States has been at war since the October of 2001, if not in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, proxy wars in Yemen, and on and on. And Donald Trump said, "What's the point of this? Let's get out of here." And the press has gone ballistic. It's interesting that the Financial Times, that's the flagship mouthpiece of the City of London, they've named George Soros as their Man of the Year. George Soros is a wealthy hedge fund manager. Originally, as a teenager, he lived in Hungary, Hungarian by birth, during World War II. He's an ethnic Jew, and he collaborated with the Nazis. He explained this on a news program a number of years ago. He collaborated with the Nazis and turned in his fellow Jews and had them sent off to concentration camps. And in retrospect, he said it was the happiest time of his life. But he was taken in by British intelligence. He was given inside info to rack up $1 billion profit betting against the Bank of England and so on. He's been at the center of a lot of the financial turmoil. Calls himself a philanthropist. He sets up organizations to undermine nation states. A few months ago, he was paying Hondurans to come into the United States with this caravan of people that was going to rush the border and so on. And he's behind the migrant invasion of Europe. So he is a point man for the British Empire and their intention to destroy the nation-state system and establish some sort of global world government. That's the game plan. And the fact that the Financial Times has named this man the Man of the Year, it tells us how far along they are in their intended project. And why I think that's noteworthy is because as I've written, I think that that's Jehovah's purpose, to destroy the nation-state system. That's what takes place in the time of the end. That's when the tyrants of the nations destroy the leading nation of the world, the greater Egypt, we might call it, America. So Jehovah's used the democratic system to facilitate his work. And when his work is done, he's through with those nations. Didn't Paul explain that in the 13th chapter of Romans, that the nations, the authorities stand placed in their relative positions by God, and God makes all of his works cooperate together for the good of those who love him? But as I say, when Jehovah's done with the work of preaching the good news, he's also finished with the so-called democratic nations that have, to an extent, protected Jehovah's Witnesses. And that'll all come crashing down. So I think we're really getting into that area where, the pushing is coming to the forefront. We have a president of the United States who said he is a nationalist. He is going to make America great and pull back from this globalist agenda. And I don't think that's going to happen. That may be his intention. He will not succeed. If he gets assassinated, boy, or impeached, I think it'll result in a civil war. And that would be the end of the nation as well. So we're getting close to something monumental. But I think first, I think President Trump is going to be the guy who says peace and security, because that is why he's pulled out of Afghanistan, or intends to, and Syria. He's meeting a lot of opposition now from his own party guys. They want war, and so they're going to get war too. That's for sure. But anyway, I think that his intention to bring about peace in the Middle East will be the trigger when the democratic system comes down, when they are saying peace and security. And they will not escape, because that will lead into Jehovah's judgment. The good news will be finished and the judgment will begin. The hour of judgment. That's what it's called in the book of Revelation. Well, I said I'd had a question from a reader, and I know this applies to a lot of people who have been studying with Jehovah's Witnesses. They get on the internet and they come across a lot of negative information about all, from the beginning, Charles Russell and Rutherford being a drunkard and a womanizer, and it's a lot of heavy stuff. It's hard for people to get their mind around. Why would you ever want to get involved in this crazy cult? Anyway, he says he's been studying with Jehovah's Witnesses for a while, and he's convinced of the majority of Jehovah's Witnesses' teachings, that they're the truth, but he has a problem with the organization itself. And he's watched some of my videos. He's aware of the Watchtower's partnership with the UN, but he also sees the false teachings of Christendom, and he says he's learned some about the history of Christendom, and he's appalled at what he's found, as he should be. But now he's looking at how the JW organization was formed, the history of Charles Russell, and he's worried that it's just another long line of false teachers. So he doesn't want to get involved. So he also goes on to say that he's come to agree with the organizational doctrines, such as hell and not everyone going to heaven, and the earth being a paradise, and God not being a trinity, and those things. But then he has some problems with some secondary things, like Jesus ruling with 144,000 from heaven, and people on earth being able to marry and reproduce. Well, I guess he agrees with that. I'm misreading that. But then he says, I'd like your input on such teachings as Jesus being Michael the Archangel, and Jesus already having come back invisibly. And he says he's struggling to find biblical evidence for these teachings, and he'd like to hear my thoughts on Charles Taze Russell. Well, first of all, I would like to say, if you're, people, it's hard for people to separate the organization from Jehovah, and it's not your fault, because the Watchtower has inseparably connected itself with God, and Jehovah's Witnesses feel that you cannot please Jehovah unless you're part of this organization, and that no one will gain salvation unless they're part of this organization, that the organization is going to lead Jehovah's faithful right into the new world. And so that is going to be a big stumbling block, I'm afraid. But going into this, if people would just try to focus on what is the truth from the Bible, can you prove it from the Bible? And I appreciate this person's comment. He says, I'm struggling to find biblical evidence for either of these teachings, such as Michael the Archangel or Jesus having come back invisibly. And I have to be frank, there is no biblical support for an invisible parousia. And that is, when we talk about the truth, it's easy to prove that Jesus is not Jehovah, that there's no Trinity. That's easy. If you know anything about the Bible, you know that Jehovah and Jesus are Father, Son, and they're not the same. And you know that death ends life, and that the resurrection means coming back to life. And it's, God's intention is to bring the dead back to life, some in heaven, a very tiny number compared to the vast majority of mankind who ever lived and died. And we know that's God's intention, to have this earth a beautiful paradise. That was why he created it in the first place. That's the truth, and that's what we should build our faith on and appreciate what Jesus has done. That is what we... And as I say, the Watchtower is doing this preaching work. But if you're studying with Jehovah's Witnesses and you're reaching this point of dedication, I would just ask you to reflect upon, who are you dedicating yourself to? If you're dedicating yourself to the Watchtower, what's the point? Aren't you just following men? But if you believe that the Watchtower is teaching the basic truth and that it has provided a platform, if you will, an organization, a program of teaching and Bible education that is fulfilling God's purpose at this particular point in time, then you should dedicate yourself to that work and to the God who's sponsoring it and to Christ. If you really want to get down to it, talk about finding biblical evidence and support, there's no evidence for the fact that Jesus presides over a perfect organization that is predator-free, that has no evil or false teachings. It's just the opposite. And again, that's a stumbling block that the Watchtower has put before Jehovah's Witnesses and before those who are studying and contemplating becoming Jehovah's Witnesses. For example, I've done a series of videos on Revelation. I'm intending to get back to that. I left off kind of at the 12th chapter. But Jesus' letters to the 7 congregations, which are symbolic, of course, but they will be in existence when Christ returns. And he addresses those congregations and speaks to the problems within those congregations. That there is this woman called Jezebel who teaches his slaves to commit idolatry and fornication. There is this Balaam sect within Christ's congregation. There is a sect of Nicolaus, which Jesus said he hates. Well, is Jesus just going to let this go on and on and on? No. His letters to these symbolic congregations, he says, look, I'm giving you time to repent. If you do not wake up, if you do not return to the love you had at first, I'm coming and I'll take your lampstand away. Or I'm coming, as in the case of Jezebel, I will throw her into great tribulation and kill her children. So the Watchtower, well, let me first say that embedded in the truth is a lie. And this is scriptural. You want biblical evidence? I've written quite a bit about the deluding influence that God allows. It emanates from Satan the devil. It's an operation of Satan the devil through a man of lawlessness. He's called the son of destruction. That should put us in mind of Judas, who Jesus said was the son of destruction. But Judas was an apostle. He was sitting at the table with Jesus when he celebrated the Passover with his apostles, right before he instituted the evening meal. And Satan entered into him and used him to betray Jesus, which led to Jesus' death. So here we have a man of lawlessness. Where do you think he is? Paul said he sits down in the temple of God. We know that's a spiritual temple. It's Christ's congregation. Paul prefaced that by saying that Jesus would not come until the apostasy comes first. So, regardless of what the Watchtower says about leading Jehovah's people, there is going to be an apostasy from the very highest level of the leadership of the Watchtower. I'm not saying all the governing body or this man of lawlessness. I don't know. It's a mystery right now. But we do see evidence of a man of lawlessness, of a wicked element from the very beginning, really. But keep that in mind. The real truth is not revealed until Christ returns. It says in Isaiah, then the moon will shine as brightly as the sun, and the sun 7 times brighter. Talk about new light. Talk about the light getting brighter. It's not a gradual brightening. It is boom. This is the truth. And that's when Christ returns. But this operation of air, this deluding influence, the lie that Jehovah allows to go forth to those who know the truth, the lie has to do with Jesus supposedly having already come. 1914. That's exactly what Paul was talking about when he said, don't be quickly alarmed regarding these seemingly inspired sayings, or if they come through a letter like through the apostle saying, the day is here, the day of Jehovah is begun, the day of the Lord is begun. Do not believe it, he said. It will not come until the apostasy comes first. But this is exactly what the Watchtower has taught from the very beginning. The parousia originally began in 1874, blah, blah, blah. And around 1930, they switched it from 1874 to 1914. But it is always embedded in the message of the Watchtower that the presence has begun. Exactly what Paul warned the brothers not to believe. So, what will happen when Jesus returns? Will the Watchtower say, well, we had it wrong all this time? Even if they do try to make some correction, they will have lost all credibility. And, good numbers will be stumbled. Regardless, that will happen anyway. As Jesus said, many will be stumbled. And no doubt that is the reason. But I don't think the Watchtower will ever say we were wrong. I think they will double down and defy the evidence that Jesus has returned. And they'll become this Judas-like Antichrist. They will oppose Jesus when he returns. That's what the evil slave will do. But that doesn't mean that the Watchtower is not being used at this present moment. So that's my message. I don't think I've been very successful convincing people of that. And it's not necessary that I do convince Jehovah's Witnesses of that. If they're happy and busy in the work of the Lord right now, that's fine. But when everything blows up, if the internet's still up, maybe I'll have a shot at him. Anyway, as regards Michael the archangel, he finds no biblical support for that. Actually, there is, and I've done a video on that, and I've written some things, so I won't really go into that now. It's simply to say that everything Michael is doing is something that Jesus is authorized to do. For example, can you imagine anyone but Christ Jesus throwing Satan out of heaven? Why does it say, for example, in the 12th chapter of Revelation, when the kingdom comes to power, war breaks out in heaven, Michael and his angels battle with the dragon and his angels? Why is Michael leading all the angels? Jesus Christ has been given that charge. Jehovah has put him over all of the angels. Yeah. Sometimes you hear Trinitarians say, and they think they've really got it figured out, because it says in Jude that it's cautioning Christians to be humble and not to overstep their authority. And it says, even Michael, when he was having a dispute with Satan about the disposition of Moses' corpse, did not bring an accusation against him in abusive terms, but said to him, may Jehovah rebuke you. And the Trinitarian, somebody has fed them this, because they all repeat the same thing, but they don't think. They don't think what they're saying. Anyway, they'll say, see, if Michael was Jesus, he would have had authority. He would have had authority to rebuke the devil, but he didn't. That's why he said, may God rebuke you. Okay. Here's what they overlook. And it's an important point to overlook. When Michael was having a dispute with Satan, that was 1,500 years before Jesus, or Michael, or the Word, the firstborn of Jehovah. How about that? It is before God's Son left heaven. He wasn't given all authority before he came to the earth. When Jesus was resurrected, then he was exalted to a superior position, and all creation was subject to Jesus. That's when God tells all the angels to obey the Son. And at Christ's second coming, the angels are told to worship the Son. So he gains authority and power. So before Jesus came to the earth, when Michael was disputing with Satan, he didn't have authority to really press him. But when Jesus comes, as recorded in the 12th chapter of Revelation, doesn't that show that Jesus has authority of Satan? He boots him out of heaven. Big difference between saying, may Jehovah rebuke you, and then saying, boom, you're out of here, bud. So think about it. Anyway, to me, it's not a real huge point. The reason that Trinitarians are adamant about Jesus not being Michael is because, obviously, if Jesus is Michael, he can't be God. Well, we know Jesus isn't God. So what's the big issue about him having a heavenly name? Jesus was his earthly name. That's a Jewish name, a derivative of Jehoshua, which means Jehovah is salvation. Jesus wasn't called Jesus before he came to the earth. He had to have a personal name. God has names for all the stars in heaven. All the angels have names. What was Jesus' pre-human name? It's simple. It's Michael. What about Charles Taze Russell? You hear a lot about, he had a lot of enemies. Let's just put things in perspective. He agitated and irritated and provoked a lot of people because of his message. At first he started off, he invited, the clergy to share his message, and they were resistant and not interested. And the Watchtower's message became more and more pointed, pointing out the obvious hypocrisy of the churches. So he had a lot of enemies, just as Jesus had a lot of enemies. And one of the techniques of the enemy is to use slander. It works. People gulp it down. By the way, the word devil in Hebrew means the slanderer. So we shouldn't be surprised that anyone who does God's work in a big way or even a small way, they're going to be maligned, misrepresented, and slandered. It happened when Russell was alive, and it's happened after his passing. Was Russell a perfect guy? Obviously not. But when we consider, and obviously he started this whole invisible parousia thing. But considering the darkness that he was coming out of, I think he played an instrumental part in starting the work of God. Rather than read, things by Russell's critics, I would recommend that you read some of the old watchtowers and books that Pastor Russell, as they called him, has written. All of them are online. The Bible students are still around, and they've put all those old watchtowers and everything online. Charles Russell was a brilliant man, I think. And he had a real love for the truth. And it shines through if you read the things that he wrote. But again, he couldn't understand prophecy. But guess what? Neither did the apostles. Right? Peter tried to correct Jesus. Lord, you won't have this destiny at all. They were so thick-headed. They could not grasp that Jesus was going to die. It's the simplest thing for us. That's the basis of Christianity. Jesus died and came back to life. But they couldn't understand that, even though Jesus told them over and over, the Son of Man is going to be delivered up. They didn't understand the prophecies about him coming back to life. They didn't know the kingdom was going to be heavenly. And yet, Jesus entrusted them with the good news, even before his death. Of course, after his death and resurrection, he opened their minds and gave them Holy Spirit. Then he says he opened up the scriptures to them, right? Well, Jehovah's Witnesses are going to experience something similar, and it's not going to come through the watchtower. At the second coming of Christ, he's going to winnow out the faithless and the wicked and take his people in a new direction and pour out his Spirit upon them in full measure. And that's when the eyes of the blind will be opened. But as I say, Charles Russell did an important work. So did J.F. Rutherford. So that they got us to where we are now. And Jehovah's not done with us. When Christ comes, then, as I say, I'm repeating myself, aren't I? But that will change everything. And I would just hope that people will have enough spirituality and be at work doing something Christian so that when Christ does come, you'll be ready and you'll have freeness of speech and you'll be ready to go in through the new door, into the new reality when it opens. Because the watchtower is not going to be there for you when that happens. They're going to be a dead end. I am repeating myself, aren't I? I guess it's time to sign off and play some more music. And hopefully I'll talk to you tomorrow.